Live. And we're live. We're
Woohoo.
here. So, should I begin?
I would love it.
All right. So, um, we've all kind of seen the news, and we kind of all know what's going on here in the United States. So, um, we feel that we need to just very briefly say something about what's going on in this country. So, and then we'll move on to the topic at hand today. So we extend our prayers to the country and all people hurting. We are heartbroken by all the people that deal with racial injustice, and we are ready to listen, to learn, and to stand in solidarity with the people that are most affected. So.
Yeah. Yep. And Elizabeth has some resources for us too that she's gonna share on her Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a helpful resource someone sent to me that I'm planning to post on my Instagram. So feel free to check that out. I think it's pretty helpful. So
Yeah. Yeah. And especially I think like we are learning through this journey that we're on, like even just like listening to each other and in our friendship, how important listening and understanding is of people that have the experience. Um and like Elizabeth and I have both seen not racial, which is obviously very different. And these are very different issues, but we've really been able to experience the power of listening and taking other people's perspectives. So we just wanted to really briefly say how much we've been affected by those who are hurting and how we are ready to learn. So, so last time we left off with a giant question about does God care if we worship? Or I mean how we worship. He cares if. We all know that. But we were talking and we decided that that is kind of above our pay grade, so to speak. And so we're gonna table that discussion and we are going to have a special guest on at a later date. And then give us a little bit more time to like do research, get our references straight, and have someone a little bit more um ready. I will have our special guest.
yeah. So this episode we decided we're going to talk about our views of sin. So fun. But yeah, I think do you want to just start with kind of like our general understanding, or do you want to start with your with specific questions for each other, Val?
Oh yeah, I have some questions. So I did not know until this past year, like within the last 6 months, really, that Protestants believe that all sins are kind of like equal, I guess. So could you just kind of like explain? Actually, how about we define sin first, and that will be because that's like my question that made me realize that like we have different understandings of sin, but maybe we should just define sin so everybody like knows we're on the same
Okay, yeah.
page. You had a nice one.
Yeah, like in confirmation, so in 8th grade, we had to memorize these building blocks, they called them, and, like, the only one that people remember, because it was the shortest one, was sin. So the confirmation, like, definition that we did was, like, sin is all in thought, word, and deed contrary to the will of God, and now so when I think of sin, I, like, spit out that answer, but I feel like I've been I don't know how helpful that definition really is, like,
Yeah.
um yeah, so I think sin is, like, because I've also heard it said that sin is, like, a condition, like, as humans, we are, like, sinful because of the fall. So,
Oh.
yeah, so I can't really put my, like, a definition out there, but I think it's just, like, our brokenness as humans. Um,
Whoa.
yeah, so yeah, that's my kind of first thoughts. Yeah, what about you, Val? What would you like say to that?
Okay, I actually think that oh my gosh, like my brain is like a fireworks show right now. I have so many questions based on what you just said. But okay, so I guess for me, like sin is always an action, like not necessarily like an external action, but even like thoughts, right? Like you can have thoughts that are obviously like contrary to the will of God. Um, but for me, sin is always a choice. Like I and this is so hard, I think. And I'm always when I go to confession, I'm always like, yeah. So for example, being sarcastic to my parents, right? Like that's a sin, right? Honor your mother and father. So when my parents say, get this pan out of the sink, happens every day. And I make some comments about, oh no, it's the end of the world. Like that is sinful. That is bad. Like God would not choose for me to do that. But right, if I say that in my head, right, oh no, it's the end of the world, right? Is that a sin because it just happens? Like I'm not like, what's a sarcastic remark I can make to my parents in order to disrespect them? So that's where I kind of get like, or if I just like roll my eyes, but it's habitual. Like, is that a sin? Because I didn't make that choice. This is where it gets hairy, and this is where I tend to seek outside counsel. um, and like this is what for me, like at least, this is one of the things that I get out of confession is like I'll say, here's the condition. Like I was living on my own for a couple of years, and now I'm not, and it's very difficult sometimes to make that transition and blah blah blah. And so I can just kind of like talk about the context and have that guidance, which is really cool. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. Um, but like if like sin is always a choice, but sometimes I set myself up because if I have been a selfish jerk all day and I've only ever thought about myself and I haven't been thinking about my family, then like the condition, right? The condition that I reflexively roll my eyes without really making the choice. Like I set myself up for that because I was acting selfish all day. So it's like it's a choice, but it's also habits. And this is where Catholics like we distinguish between types of sin and culpability and things like that. But we can kind of but that's kind of like I guess my definition is like sin is always it always involves some sort of choice on my part. Catholics have another word for kind of the brokenness that you were describing. And we call that concupiscence. It's like the tendency towards sin. It's
Oh.
that brokenness. Yeah. So we actually like differentiate because as Catholics we love coming up with long words, making kids memorize them.
So
Yeah.
would you mind like kind of explaining, like I know one time you had talked about there's like a couple different categories of sin, and then also the with that word you just said, like what that means and how it's different from sin and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, can I ask you a question before I answer your question? Could
Yeah,
you
yeah, sure.
could you define the Protestant understanding of original sin? Because I will need to use original sin,
Oh.
and I just want to see if that's the same. Because I don't want to start using original sin if we don't have this. Because I don't know if we understand it the same. I kind of think we don't.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that so that we're not like talking past each other. Um
Yeah.
I I feel like I don't I don't personally use that word a lot, like that phrasing. Like I feel like I say more like the fall. Do you guys say the fall?
Yeah.
I
That's our
think that's I don't know, like, if that's just me, but, like, that's kind of I hear that more than the original sin, but I think of that as, like, when Adam and Eve made that, like, the first choice to sin. Like, they could have
right.
walked with God, but they made that choice, and then, like, all of humanity also sinned, is kind of what I think of when I hear the fall or original sin.
Sure. Yeah.
What do you what do you mean by it?
So okay, I didn't realize how different my definition is, like how distinct. So like the fall is an event for us, right? It's like the moment that the relationship of trust was broken between God and humanity because all of humanity decided not to trust him. That was like Adam and Eve. So that's the fall, and that would be the original sin. But then there's this concept of like original sin, which is like passed down, right? So like when we're all born, we have that brokenness, and I think it's helpful to think about like the condition before the fall, right? Like Adam and Eve like walked in the garden with God. Oh, and sidebar. This is not a sidebar actually. It's a regular bar. Um when I was just reading Genesis like 2 weeks ago, I think before our last live stream, and it was talking about how they like knew the sound of his footsteps, or like whatever. There's some line in there. Just I left my Bible downstairs, or, but there, trust me, there's some, and it was a translation that I didn't normally read, so like it slipped past me a bunch of times, and the line talked about how they like knew his footsteps, and I was just thinking about how, like, when my family walks down the stairs in the morning, I know, like, which one of my family members it is before I ever see them because I know them so well. I can, like, I know the sound of their footsteps. And I was like, Adam and Eve knew God so well that they knew the sound of his footsteps in a garden, like in dirt. You know what I mean? Like, how well do you have to know someone to know their footsteps? And anyway, so like that unity was just like so close, like just like they were a family, like with God. And now we're all born in this condition of original sin where none of us know God that well, right? Like we don't have that relationship with God the Father anymore. And like that condition of our soul, like that separation that was like never really intended is what I would call original sin. Like the original sin that like was passed to me was that broken relationship, I guess.
And when you say passed, you mean like since Adam and Eve's been passed down to all humanity?
Yeah, because we're all
Okay.
like descended from them.
Okay. And that way you described the footsteps thing, that was really cool.
Thanks.
I've never
That
thought
was
about
like straight from the Holy Spirit. I was like, this is awesome. But I got this sick new journaling Bible, so I've been really learning.
yeah, no,
learning
that's
about
awesome.
God. So it's been pretty sweet. But thanks. But
Yeah.
yeah. So okay, this is something I've never heard a Protestant describe though, is like having the original sin. Like, is that terminology? Because I don't know if it's theology or not, but is that like common terminology? Because that's like real common for Catholics to like talk
Like
about like our state of original sin.
yeah, like I don't say I don't think I've ever said like my state of original sin.
Okay.
Like,
But we also believe it's wiped away at baptism.
oh,
So like
Wait,
there's a wrench.
wait. Yeah, no,
Surprise.
I don't know that. So
Yeah, so yeah.
so original sin is the sin like just because we say sinful nature or like your flesh, like my flesh versus my spirit kind of thing.
Sure, sure.
So like original sin, would that be comparable to like sinful nature? Like as a human, I have a
No.
sinful nature.
Like, kind of, almost. But so okay, I just remembered this, so this is actually helpful. It's like original sin, right? It's like so the sin of Adam and Eve is passed down, and so it's like this wound. So it's as if, um, someone like we're all born with, like, a nail in our shoulder or something like that, right? And you take baptism takes the nail out. So it takes that sin away, right? But you still have a hole.
Huh.
And so that's kind of how Catholics understand it. It's like original sin is like this big spike that we're born with, and baptism takes it out, like it's gone. But we still have this hole. We still have in the hole, right? We'd say is tendency towards sin and towards like pride, like all, which is a sin, and our tendency towards desiring things that aren't God. And that tendency is what we would call concupiscence.
So the original sin is the nail and the
Right.
whole the what is it? Constant how
Con-
do you say
concupiscence. I can't spell it.
concupiscence?
Concupiscence, yeah.
Okay. Huh. That's a cool analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's helpful. And because we'll say the same thing with confession, right? Like the sin that you did is the nail. Confession will take out the nail, but like you still have to deal with that. Like if you cheat on someone, confession will take away the nail, it'll take away the sin, but like you still have to deal, like that relationship is still gonna be broken, and like damaged. So it's kind of like that.
Okay. Huh, that's really interesting. I like that analogy.
Yeah, and I think like Protestant theology might, because it sounds like what you're saying with like the like your flesh and your humanity, like it almost sounds like you have the same theological or like a similar theological understanding of like the like results of the fall without all the big words that Catholics just love. We just love them.
Because also, like, I just might not have there might be those words, I just don't know, like, it might
Right, right,
yeah, so it might just be my, like, level of understanding isn't
right,
like, you know the differences and stuff, but it sounds, like, similar in the sense of, like, I have individual sins, like, I am sinful as a human, and,
right,
like, there was the fall that caused that sinfulness.
right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sweet.
So, yeah,
Okay.
no, I'm glad we clarified that because it's interesting, like, how differently we would explain it.
Right, right. And I think a lot of that is just the religious formation. And this is gonna send me off on a tangent, so I'm just gonna, but I think generally speaking, like in our geographical area, like Protestant churches are so good at like community, and the emphasis is a lot on fellowship, and Catholic churches, that is not as strong an emphasis at this point. And a lot more of our like youth participation in church is like very like intellectually geared, so it's like it's sitting with a workbook like learning all these terms, which
Mm,
there's strengths and weaknesses to that, and I but that could be another episode.
yeah, no, that's interesting because like, we had when I was in confirmation, like, we had exams and, like, building blocks, like, that I was
Mhm.
talking about to memorize and stuff, and
Yeah,
they kind of, like, have done away with that because
sure.
yeah, because it's, like, that sense of I guess that sense of, like, not wanting students to see 'cause it for us, it's 7th and 8th grade, so, like, not wanting middle schoolers to be like, "Oh, this is just, like, more school, like, I want
Right.
out." So, like, it's kind of so, yeah, it is interesting how different it is in that sense.
Yeah, yeah, and that is probably something we could talk about too. It's like the differences in like religious formation and
Yeah.
because I do think that there are strengths and weaknesses to both, and I think it would be wise for all of us to kind of like come into the middle. Because I think it's good to know your faith, right? Good to
Yes.
like know it because like words give us kind of like an ownership over it, but also doesn't help if you leave. Like most of the people I went to CCD with, like, because that meaning wasn't given to those words, which I think Protestants are a lot better at, is like showing the relational aspects of faith. So, but that can be another where we can go into more
Yeah,
depth.
no, that's really interesting, and that might be part of the reason, or you just paid more attention than me, but it might be part of the reason why you, like, know more of the, like, words and and I'm
Yeah,
more like, "Well, it's
I
like,
have
I."
a feeling. Yeah,
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 so,
but it
yeah.
is interesting. Yeah. Okay. Shoot, what was I gonna ask you now? Oh, you asked me about the. Oh, by the way, do we have any questions? I can't see
Uh,
them.
we do not right now.
Wait,
Okay.
Elizabeth, do you have any on your Instagram?
I don't think so. Oh, okay, so I'm streaming it live right now, but no one's on it, so we must end it. So, let me check, and see if I got any. I didn't last time I, um, was on my thing. Let me check.
Oh, gotcha.
Um,
Okay.
Um, ooh,
I know,
no, I
uh,
have no questions on my thing.
I
Okay.
could,
Dope.
I could definitely speak about my. I think we could even do like a comparison of like how we got our religious ed, because I think even like mind of
Oh,
vows
yeah,
would be different because we're in two different parts of the country.
that's true.
Oh,
In
yeah,
different
That would be really
dioceses.
interesting, actually. Just have a
Hmm.
round table.
Yeah.
What religious formation looks like. Oh, Matt, I have a question.
Okay.
Not a thing. Can you put words on the screen as we're talking? Is that like a thing that's possible?
Like live? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Well, I don't know. I was just like
I've
curious.
never
I don't need
tried.
it right now, but I was thinking it could be helpful.
I think I can.
All right.
then we
So,
can know how to spell
oh
that
no, I can't spell that at all. Concupiscence.
I don't even trust myself to type that. Like I'd rather that someone like type that to me and so I can copy and paste it.
It has an I in it that like doesn't belong. Like I know that because I always am like, there's memes about it. But anyway, um,
Of course.
anywho, um, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, so I was gonna kind of talk about because you had asked me about like the different ways Catholics define sin.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, I'm fishing with my
okay,
phone right now. I'm trying to, like, get it back live. Okay. Yes, because like, that was very different for me. I think it also, and I can go into this later, I think the way I think about sin too is very tied to, like, just the way my brain works.
yeah, because we
So I
both have
think
our
that
own
would be interesting to talk
individual.
about, but I think first I wanna hear about, like, because the way you described the different categories of sin and, like, there were, like, 3, like,
Conditions.
thing yeah, yeah, if you could, like, go into that
Yeah,
was, like, new to me.
yeah. So okay, I think it's helpful. So mortal sin is the big bad one. That's why it's called mortal. And mortal sin is an intentional, like, turning our backs on God. And mortal sin has 3 conditions. And I'll get sorry. I'm like, what order do I talk in? So mortal sin has 3 conditions, and you have to know that it's a mortal sin. So I'm trying to think of a good example that's not too terrible. Missing mass for us is a mortal sin because like we're obligated to keep the Sabbath holy, blah blah blah.
Wait,
So
missing mass, like, if you miss a Sunday, that's a mortal sin?
yes,
Like
not right
deliberately.
now, obviously, because there's like the coronavirus, so there's a dispensation for the indefinite future. Even though we can like get the Eucharist right now, there's still like dispensation. But there's all kinds of like It's not intended to be harsh. It's intended to like I mean, like if right, like if you believe that the Eucharist like is actually the body and blood of Christ, then like why wouldn't you rearrange your whole life to get there?
Oh, wow, yeah, that's so different than,
Yep.
I mean, that's a whole different
Yeah,
conversation, but then the way I view missing church, like, this Sunday,
right.
I'm like, "Oh, I'm not gonna watch our live stream because, like, my friend's graduating." Like, no big deal. So,
Yeah.
anyways, we can get back
No,
to the topic at
no,
hand.
that's okay
Yeah,
because I
so
I didn't watch a live stream this
oh,
week either, but I'm not
you've broken
obligated
up.
to it.
Um,
But
I should add in like a caveat to that. Like it's like if you deliberately,
yeah, you got
if there is physically no way for you to get to mass for whatever reason, you have I can't even name like a scenario, but like if there's literally no way for you to get there,
I had a
that's
migraine
obviously
for
not.
once, and I didn't go to mass. Like, you know what I mean? Because I was like, I am so sick. I cannot walk. And so that was like, so that's the thing. It's like, for mortal sin, right? You have to know that it's a mortal sin. So all
Okay.
these Catholics, right, that like they go to mass on Christmas and Easter, I sincerely doubt that they know, like, that it is a sin to miss mass. Like, if they don't know, like, what are we gonna hold them responsible for that? No, like that's silly.
Mhm.
Um, so miss it. So like you have to know it has to be a grave matter. So if I stub my toe and say something like let's say I say, "Oh my God," right? I stub my toe. I say, "Oh my God." That I mean, taking the Lord's name in vain is pretty bad, but it's not necessarily grave, right? Like that's not a grave matter. Or I'm trying to think of something else. It's like not grave. Um, I usually pick swearing or
Uh,
like being selfish all day and then I roll my eyes at my parents. That's not a grave matter. Like it's just not like that's not it's completely turning my back on God. It's not grave. And the last one is you have to have your full will like accessible to you. So if I have a migraine and I miss mass, right? I know that it's wrong. I know it's a grave matter, but like I don't have the full faculty, like the full capacity of my will because like there's something in the way of like it's not my choice anymore. So it has to be a full and complete choice. So if I have a migraine, if I or another good one, right, is if I'm traveling and mass is at 3. It says it's 3 on the website. I show up at 3 and the website's wrong. This happened to me. I was super mad about it. I was like, how hard is it to update a website? But anyway, right? That's I didn't choose that. Like I know that it's wrong. I know it's a grave matter, but that wasn't my choice. It's not a sin. So that's a mortal sin. So a venial sin is everything that is that wounds your relationship with God that doesn't fit those 3 criteria. So, like rolling my eyes at my parents, venial. Uh, if I have said, right, let's say I have said, like Jesus Christ in vain for my whole life, and then I have a conversion and I realize, like, oh my gosh, like that's such a big sin. Like, that is like the holy name of Jesus Christ. Like, I need to, like, at the name of Jesus Christ, every knee shall bow. Like, and I am convicted of this and it's beautiful, but then someone cuts me off in traffic and I yell it out, right? That is that's a habitual sin. Like you know that to you like that is grave and like that or I don't know if that's grave or not. Don't listen to me. It is. Even if it is grave and I do it habitually, right? And it's not my full capacity of will or whatever. Venial sin. Selfishness, venial sin. Just being a prideful, arrogant person, venial sin. You know, like like all those things that are more just like conditions that exist and we might act in accordance with those conditions, venial. And also I always like to say, so especially teenagers, because I know we have a lot of teens watching this, like there's differences in culpability. So for like pornography, obviously like that is sinful, right? But there are people that are legitimately and that is grave. And it's grave matter. You might know, but if you're addicted to it, right, you don't have the full capacity of your will. So obviously like you now have the responsibility to work on that, right? To just brush things under the rug and say, oh well, I'm addicted, like it's not my problem. That's a sin, right? Because you know it's a grave matter. Now you have full will, right? But I shouldn't have brought this up. This is such a sticky topic. Why did I choose that? But if you're addicted to something, right, you don't have every single instance you don't choose to have that, like you don't have your full consent of the will, but it is your responsibility to work on it. Same thing with like lustful thoughts. Like you're half the time you're not choosing them. They're just like popping into your head because your hormones are going crazy. If something just pops into your head, if it's could be violent, could be aggressive, could be sexual. If it just pops into your head and you're like, whoa, didn't ask for that, that's not a sin. You didn't do it. It's not an action. And that is where I would say that's concupiscence, right? We have a tendency towards all these. We have a tendency to grab at power. We have a tendency to lust. We have a tendency to all of these things. But tendencies are not choices, so they are not sins. But if we cooperate with them or we choose to do nothing about them, that is sinful. That's a really long definition.
No, that's really good. So you do mortal is like the big ones.
Biggie, yeah.
What was the other one?
Venial, yeah.
Venial is like not as big of a deal, and so
Right.
but still sin. So those are those are the two categories,
Yeah.
and then you have the constituent.
Concupiscence.
Why can't I remember these words? You
I don't
literally.
know, probably because you can see it. Hold on, I'm gonna try to find a concupiscence meme real fast. And actually, I can't spell it to even perfect.
And then that's the tendency.
Yeah, that's the tendency.
And then the rules, not the rules, the three like guidelines for. Is it only for mortal, or do those three guidelines apply to both?
So those three are for mortal, and anything that doesn't fit those three would fall under venial.
Oh.
So it's like if it's those three things, it's mortal. Everything else that wounds your relationship with God is venial.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. We definitely don't have like such set categories, or at least
Yeah.
I don't for sin.
Benefits. These are funny. Okay, this is sorry. All right. Can I send something in the chat? Can I do that? Oh yeah, I can. Hold on.
Send it. No, don't send it there. Put it in the Google Doc, and then I can put it on screen.
Okay, but how do I? Oh yeah, I guess
just put the link.
Okay.
I'll pull it up, and I'll just kind of put it on screen because I can move my mouse and move everything over. So.
Okay, hold on. I gotta copy the link.
Yeah, I appreciate. I mean, I appreciate all memes, but like, I feel like Christian ones when it's like, yes, I relate to that so deeply, are great. So I'm excited for this meme.
It's of Dory. It's on the doc. Elizabeth, right now you can see it. I don't know how to get other people to see it. Hold on.
Can you give me the link?
Yeah, I just lost my cursor. It's there. Okay, we got it.
There we go. I'll just kind of drag that onto the screen underneath me. It's just covering up your face now, so the audience can see. I firmly resolve to sin no more. Oh look, I can't even say it myself.
Concupiscence.
Concupiscence.
The word of the day is concupiscence.
All right. Is there a way I can copy and paste I'm gonna put that in the show notes here. Passages referenced Genesis is it con and then cup and then is sense. Is sense.
Is sense. That's a good way to think about it. Cup.
I still sound things out. What can I say?
I mean, that's how reading works.
I just learned.
Quiet. Quiet, tech man.
Be gone, tech man. And then I'm just gonna make myself vanish on screen very briefly.
Just put a meme on top of me. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right.
Back
I'll bring myself back.
Back to the business of sin. Okay, so this is something I learned this year about Protestantism. This is kind of how I tried to start without realizing that we needed a whole lot of backstory. But so I didn't realize that was different. Like I just thought like all of that stuff. So like culpability, right? Like how in charge of the sin you are, I would say is like how, like if whether or not you're addicted, whether or not it's like habit, blah blah blah. So like we have different culpability, like different levels of like guilt associated with maybe the same action. But like if I skip mass is different than someone who like only goes Christmas and Easter, doesn't realize I skip mass, different sin, like different culpability, different gravity than someone who doesn't know, right?
Yeah.
So, but I didn't realize. So, okay, I just think this is so interesting. So Protestants don't really talk about that. It's like not something that's like discussed, I guess.
Well, I mean, we've talked about like how you can't hold someone who doesn't believe the same thing as you to the same standards. So like
Sure. Okay.
we have talked about that, like that, for a man, it's hard to think of examples on the spot.
It is because
But like,
here's the thing: you always go to murder, and then Caitlin, my sister, says, "Val, you talk about shooting people way too much on your live streams," and I was like, "So I'm really trying not to use that as an example anymore." Anyway, sorry.
but like if this might be another sticky topic to talk about, but like, we in the church talk about like sex before marriage, and that's kind of like a thing that like is a well known like thing in Christianity. But if you're not a Christian and like you don't believe like that's not your standard, then like we can't be like you're sinning for doing something that we
Right.
believe that you don't believe. Like so we do talk about that in that sense, or that I've heard of at least.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, and I have a I have a thought too. So you ask your question, then I'll share my thought.
Okay. So here's the newest addition to my knowledge of Protestantism is that so for Protestants, it's not like there's no mortal and venial. But if you're a Christian, right, every sin like is the same in God's eyes. Like where Catholics are like, no, like blah blah blah. Here's like all these like words that you have to learn about this. It's like Protestants. So there's this thing that I saw that I think you showed me that it's like how we see sins and like one is like really bad and big and like the other is like small and then but like God looks down and he just sees like squares.
Oh,
You
I
know?
don't think that was me that tweeted that. I don't think I've seen that.
Oh, there you go.
Can you say that again? You kind of cut out with that. Val.
Oh, well like it's like there's like a bar graph almost of like badness of sins kind of and it's like like murders up here and like stealing's down here and like gossips down here or whatever and so it's like this bar graph but it's three-dimensional and then it's like our view of sin and then like God looks down and it's like he just sees like the top of the bar graph so he just sees squares so they're all the same
Oh, I see. Okay.
but like like Catholics would say like no that's not true but that's like something that's an idea that I was unfamiliar with.
Yeah. Um,
Well, here's a
yeah,
question.
I don't what was that?
I was gonna offer a question. Why would Catholics not see it that way?
Because of like culpability, like one. That's a good question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, because right, if I do some like God and I have a certain relationship, right, and like within that relationship, certain things have been revealed to me as like my responsibilities, right? So like God through our relationship of the sacraments of all of these different things, like I now know that I have to go to confession because like that is a part and that is a part of like God's and my relationship. And so I'm responsible to that relationship. But Elizabeth is not responsible to go to confession. I guess that's not a sin though. That's a bad example. But you know what I mean? Like well, okay, here's something. I'm responsible to send Matt a birthday card this month. Your birthday's this month, right? It's June. I don't know what month.
Sure.
Yeah, your birthday's this month. I know it. So I'm responsible to send you a birthday card this month because I know it and I'm like responsible to our relationship. But I'm not responsible to send someone I like, don't know birthday card. I don't know. I
Yeah,
guess that's
no,
kind of
I
like
see what
that's
you're
kind
saying.
of not the same thing though.
I see what you're
Uh,
saying though. Yeah.
like because of my relationship with God, like I have more responsibility than someone who like passively goes to church or something like I have different responsibilities. Well, okay, let's go back to the porn example, right?
Mm.
I am not addicted to porn, and I know that it is wrong, right? So for me to commit that sin is like a bigger deal than if like my friend had showed me when I was 9 years old pornography and I
Mm.
like searched it or something. So, you know what I mean? Like the one is bigger than the other. And like
Sure.
my relationship with God is going to be influenced differently because of the relationship I already have with him.
Okay.
Yeah, because I guess like I would agree with that. That like some sins are a bigger deal than others. Like,
Yeah.
but I guess no, this could be wrong. This is just like my perspective and thoughts. As I say like 5 times,
Everything I said might be wrong too.
like so if I sin in like, you know, like I intentionally like say something that really hurts someone versus
Right.
like I don't know. I like man, these examples are so hard.
It's so
Okay,
hard to come up with
s-
examples.
so like I guess if so there's a sin like I commit bigger sins and smaller sins. Like so I feel like that kind of view we have that, but they're all sins. And I don't know, I hear this phrase like they're all equal in the eyes of God and like they have different earthly implications. Like some hurt people, some will lead to me like long-term problems. Some are just like, oh, I like, stubbed my toe and said a word I shouldn't have said. Or like, so there's very
Right.
but like every sin is something Jesus died for. And like every sin
Yeah.
like yeah. So I think in that I think of it I guess more in that sense like my daily like little things like oh man I like can't break this habit or whatever like those Jesus died for and covered like just as much as he died for like a murderer or like when I commit like a big sin like they're all covered by his blood.
Yeah.
So I guess and I don't know, I also feel like and this could be again wrong, but like we don't since I don't have since we don't have the like tradition of confessing our sins to a priest, I don't
Right.
really like think about them as like I don't really like write them down or like have them as
Right.
clearly thought of in my mind, which I think can be good and bad because I think part of it is like okay, like all my sins are already forgiven. Like if there's something that's on my heart that I want to confess to God or pray to him about, like yeah, like it's great to do that. But if I don't, it's still forgiven. And like so
Sure.
so it doesn't need to be categorized or like labeled. It's more of like, oh Lord, I'm really struggling with like selfishness. Will you please forgive me? Will you help me? Like that's like do that if you want, but if you don't, your selfishness and your selfish tendencies and actions are still forgiven. And
Yeah.
like kind of I think I used to get caught up in more of the sense of like I think there's a verse that's like, if you confess your sins, he'll be faithful and just to forgive or something. And I kind of, not that I confessed every sin, but I like took that too literally and was like, does God forgive me if I don't confess? And
Oh.
I think that was my mindset kind of.
Right.
And now I'm in more of the mindset of like, it's all forgiven. Like what I have done, what I am doing, what I will do, the blood of Jesus has already covered it, and he's already restored me to a right relationship with him. And like
Yeah.
confessing my sins and stuff is more of like for me to get off my chest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I think we've talked about that. But like so it doesn't yeah, so it's uh, so I think it's like I've heard like there's a podcast, the preacher was talking about how like God doesn't want me to come to him and be like, "Oh, I'm so guilty. Like these are all the things I've done wrong today." Like he wants me to come and be like and remember, "Oh yeah, like I'm forgiven. Like I'm your child. You've already covered my sins. Like you see me as pure because you made me your righteous." Like that those are the things
Right.
like, So it's not that like confession's still good and helpful, and we don't want to gloss over our sins, which I think we
Right.
can do too much. So I'm not trying to like bat down confession because I think that has a good place in faith. But
Yeah.
like that it's I don't know, I guess it just makes it seems to match up more like if you're going to confession and that's more of a practice that you do, it makes more
Mhm.
sense that you would categorize and like think through sin so you can like articulate them. Whereas for me, it's more like
True.
you know what I mean. So it's since I don't have that, there's less of a like these are the sins and these are the levels kind of thing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I'm like really digesting what you just said because that is like a whole like it's definitely like a whole other world view for me.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like, yeah.
And this goes back to like what our like special guest in the future is going to talk about. um, like I'll have to tell that person that that's what we refer to them as our special guest.
Special guest.
Is
I'm
going
so
to talk about
excited.
like you know did God intend for there to be so many different ways to follow and like so I don't know if one is necessarily good or bad. Like at the end of the day, we both acknowledge that we sin and that Jesus has forgiven us, and that is good news. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's like the gospel, right? It's like,
yeah,
hey, you're free of this. Like that is the like gospel means good news. Like that's the gospel. Like,
yeah. But I think
yeah.
something too like when I have had the mindset of like, oh man, like I sin all the time. Like so I think in that case, like labeling sins, confessing them, categorizing them can be helpful. So it's like, okay, yeah, I do sin, but like it's not just this like abstract cloud around me. Like so I feel like
Right.
sometimes without having such like labels or categories, it just seems like this abstract thing that's always hovering kind of when it's not. So
Right.
I feel like confessing and stuff can be helpful in that sense so I don't feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like all of the sacraments, like that's usually my big emphasis is like the benefit of the sacraments is it makes our the unseen seen, like it makes things tangible.
Yeah.
And so that's helpful for me because I get like stuck in abstraction. So it's
Yeah.
helpful to have that tangibility. But
Yeah,
yeah,
so I feel like there's that part of me that's like, it doesn't feel necessary to, like, categorize and stuff, but then there's that part of me that's like, it really does help sometimes to be like, "Okay, like, these are the things I'm struggling with, and, like, I need to just get them off my chest." So, like,
right.
yeah, I think finding I feel like as usual, that, like, balance of, like, whether it's me as a Protestant not going to confession, but finding that balance for me that works with, like,
Right.
and or for you going to confession but remembering that it's not like not just doing it as an empty ritual but remembering what it means and
Right.
so it's like finding that whichever whether you're Catholic or Protestant finding that like balance that works for you between you and God.
Right. Right. And especially like I think a lot of I don't know if Protestants use this word. I think they do. It's not like doctrinal, it's more like a human word, but like scrupulosity, like you can be over scrupulous. And,
Yeah.
like, that is a really nice way to, like, be self-centered in a really destructive way, where it's like scrupulosity is like, I become so obsessed with my sin that it's like, first of all, it's, like, unhealthy, and 2, it's, like, not it's not constructive, and you start to second guess every single decision, which is not good, and, like, it's just not what God wants for us. Like you said, like, God doesn't want us to be sitting there all the time just, like, feeling, like, stuck and, like, dwelling in our sin, like, he wants us to be free of it, which is, like, kinda, like, the whole point of this whole religion, and, yeah, so, like, it's important not to be scrupulous. But,
Yeah.
okay, I do have a question, though, because and it's gonna sound like a mean question,
Yeah, but before okay, sorry to cut you
but
off, but, like, the way you described scrupulous was really helpful, I think where my, like, mind just naturally goes as, like, kind of a overthinker kinda person, but
yeah, me
also
too.
I feel like confession from the outside seems, like, scrupulous or maybe not scrupulous, but just, like, what's that word? L like, trying to earn grace kind of thing. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
described it, though it has been really helpful and clarifying to me. But
Okay.
anyway, now what was your question?
Oh, yeah. So I guess so. Like when you were describing Jesus and like how you think about sin, I'm trying to think about how to like phrase this question. It's like very nebulous in my mind right now. But so like Catholics believe, right, that like Jesus died for my sins, like in the past, in the present, and in the future. Like all of those things, like he is eternal, so he was simultaneously outside and inside time, which that's the whole thing. We'll just blow right past that because that's impossible to understand. And so like yes to that, right? Um, but like I guess what I'm asking is like the role of guilt. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Basically, like what's the point in getting better? You know, like what is the point in like overcoming my tendencies, overcoming my pride and like lustful tendencies and all of these things in order to become better if like Jesus all like if the term like if
Already
we know, right? Like if we know. I think the same thing could really be said
Yeah,
towards Catholics, but
no, that's a good question.
yeah.
I think I think the first things that come to my mind, um, are that like that we feel better when we're not living in sin.
Yeah.
When God promises abundant life, that's the life like with outside of sin.
Yeah.
So it benefits me too. Like it's not just like, oh, I have to get rid of this habit because da, da, da. It's like, no, like I'll feel so much better once I get rid of this habit and this sin. Um, and also just that it's like the way God intended me to live is not in this sin.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I don't technically have to like, or so like I could like just check it off the box and be like, just kind of go through the motions, but like it would really like benefit my soul to work on it. And like it's what God wants for me because those two things are in line. Like,
Yeah.
did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Because I think it's like beautiful because it's like why should I get out of sin? I don't know, because I love God. Like,
Yeah,
like
and it's like it's so cool that God is like what he wants is what makes our soul like at peace. Like that
yeah,
he's not like you have to do this and it's like, oh, okay, I'll do it. I mean, it does feel like that way sometimes, but ultimately, like when we do it, we feel better and like we
yeah,
feel at peace and joy and all those things, which is super
yeah,
cool. Like, go God for that He makes like our joy in line with His commands, even though
right.
it doesn't always feel like that, but
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really good. Because I think Catholics like we have this like rap of like guilt. Like,
Mm.
like insert any popular Catholic joke. It's about like being guilty. And I think we like much more we define it, which is good. Like we've kind of talked about, like there's benefits and drawbacks to having a lot of definitions and vocabulary to go along with our doctrine because it kind of helps us like organize um and like understand and maybe protect against scrupulosity too because to like understand different like levels or whatever. But I forget where I was going with. Oh yeah, so like Catholic, we like to talk about being in a state of grace a lot, and being in a state of grace is being free from mortal sin. And basically, what that means is like um, if a mortal sin, right, is me totally turning my back on God, and I would do this as like a little skit when I taught confirmation classes, is like I would have someone be like, okay, this person is God, and he is trying to give me something, right? Like he is handing me grace. He is handing me grace. If I mortally sin and I turn my back, I can no longer receive it as readily. Like, I have to put my hands behind my back. I have to like do all this stuff. But if I've turned my back, like God is still trying to give me the grace. I've turned my back. Am not ready to receive it anymore. Like my soul is no longer disposed to that act of reception. So, like we use the term state of grace, and the reason that we use that term is because you have to be in a state of grace to receive the Eucharist at Mass, or like confirmation, even so you're encouraged to go to confession prior to, because the other thing that we say is, right, your venial sins are cleansed by the Eucharist. So like all my little like habits and things like that I do, like all my, I call my stupid sins, like just like me being like stupid, that's cleansed every week when I receive when I was able to receive the Eucharist. It's opening up, but so that's cleansed, and so I don't need to like get all like freaked out about it and like write every time I roll my eyes at. Like also like I just tell the priest habits, like but like they're cleansed by the Eucharist. The only thing that you like need to go to confession for is mortal sins, because if you're in a state of mortal sin, you are not in a ready, like your soul is not ready to receive all of the graces that like God is trying to give you, because you turned your back. And but obviously like God is waiting to heal that. He's waiting to reorient you, reorder you, and that's why we have the sacrament of confession, is that reorienting, that reordering towards himself. But we also still go, like I still go all the time. Doesn't mean that every time I go I'm in a state of mortal sin. Like you have to go to confession when you have a mortal sin, but like you don't have to have a mortal sin to go to confession. It's always nice just to have that reorienting and to tangibly hear the priest say, well, tangibly, it's not the right word, but
Yeah.
To hear the priest say, like, you are forgiven, like, and he's standing in the person of Christ and saying, you are forgiven, is an extremely powerful experience. And it's powerful no matter if it's just the little, because sometimes I think our relationship with God is like death by 1,000 cuts. Like, I might not have mortally sinned for a while, but you better believe I racked up about a bunch, double digits of venial sins just today. So, like, come on. I don't know. But I forget what my point was. I guess I just wanted to kind of like talk about being in a state of grace and why Catholics come off as like such a guilty religion. Because guilt's productive to get you back into a state of grace.
Yeah, and I think the way you described like venial sins are cleansed by the Eucharist and then mortal are from confession, like I feel like in some ways it's similar, some ways it's different. Like I think all my sins are just like kind of how that Eucharist just like wipes your slate clean. That's just like constantly Jesus's grace. Like his mercies are new for us every morning.
Yeah.
Like there's not a point at which it happens. It's just kind of a constant. And that's the same for like bigger mortal sins too. Like sorry, I didn't mean to be like mortal sins, but like
No,
I didn't
no,
like
that's fine.
just like big like mortal or bigger sins too. Like
Yeah.
that those are still cleansed automatically, although those are probably more likely the ones you're gonna wanna confess and just like pray, not even like confess, but like talk to God about and like
Yeah.
tell him your struggle, like receive his grace, like that kind of similar thing with what you do with the priest. But like I guess a question I have is like if you don't confess to a priest, if you like I committed a mortal sin,
Right.
can you just confess it to Jesus and like would it be the same forgiveness? Kind
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
I know like the priest like there is like you explained, I think you explained it so well that there's like it's so helpful. It can be so helpful just to hear it from another person, like and especially a priest. And you've talked about like that the priest is like like in Christ at that moment, and there's like just like a powerful symbolism behind that. But like, would you be just as forgiven by Jesus if you just confessed it to him directly?
Yes. That's a great question. So
I can
short
chime
answer,
in.
yes. Like the short answer is like absolutely yeah. Right? Because like the forgiveness is always the same. But sorry, Matt, I just ignored you.
No, it's okay.
I got so excited.
I got so excited too because I was like, I can answer something.
Yeah, go
Um,
Matt.
You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
So like, let's take the example of like what's going on with coronavirus right now. We can't expose ourselves to other people. Like we have to be within 6 feet. Believe it or not, confessionals are not social distancing compliant, even if there is a screen, or but point is, you can actually confess your sins to Jesus and it be the same. And for a while there, for a period of maybe a month, that's what you were supposed to do. Is if you felt like you needed to, like, if you felt the need that you needed to go to confession, there were resources that you could use to say a prayer, and if you wholeheartedly meant that confession, your sins were forgiven. So
But we're always supposed to do that. Like, that's
yeah.
not just specific to coronavirus. Like, and you can riff also. I riff. I just say whatever I want.
Yeah,
I'm too lazy to Google.
that's also true. Yeah, but my point is, like, when you can go, as you were trying to say, Elizabeth, in person of Christ, or which I'll use the Catholic term, in persona Christi. I'll get to use that word. That is more preferred, and Val can correct me on this, the way I'm saying it, but it's more preferred. But if it's not possible, there is another way.
Yeah. And like, I would say probably the way that I would kind of describe that relationship is like, I am bound to the sacraments, but God is not. Like,
Ooh,
it
that's
is
good.
I am responsible to go to confession, but like, God can forgive me whenever he wants. Like, I could not even confess, and right, God's forgiveness is still there.
Yes. Okay, I
Yeah.
feel like that's where the disconnect is. Like,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that like, because if I have an accountability partner or whatever, like my mentor, my friend, family member who I like to, when I sin and struggle with something, they're my go-to, like, oh man, I need to talk to you about this, like, and to give me advice, remind me that I'm forgiven, like, that's great. Like, but
Right.
that's not me. But like, I think sometimes when, like, me or other Protestants might see, like, oh, you confess to be forgiven because you believe that you need the priest's permission or whatever. Like, we see it, I
Right.
think, sometimes as like, it seems like that's what you do to earn. Whereas, like you were saying,
Right.
you're already completely forgiven. It's just like a symbolism. It like helps you receive it more fully.
Right.
Is that right?
Almost. There's a
Okay.
couple of things that I kind of want to address. So first, I would really like to like de-emphasize the role of the priest,
Yeah.
uh, because like we so mm, I'm actually gonna answer this in a different way. I'm gonna back up. So right, Catholics believe that sacraments are not just symbols of grace, but actual vehicles of grace, and like they're very specific. Blah blah blah. The sacraments are always like ministered through the church. And like there's different ways, and like marriage is a little bit different, and baptisms, like there's all these like there's a lot to them. But like the ministry will say like, and it's in the prayer of absolution, which is the prayer that the priest says is like through the ministry of the church. And so the ministry of the church, right, that's like the Catholic Church is this the mystical, like it's like this mystical institution, because and I think that this is important to say, because this is actually different, like substantially different than like a Protestant church, or like that we like our understandings of like what our churches are and why we have them is very different, because like you were saying, like it's not a sin for you to miss service, because like we believe that the ministry of the church exists for different purposes. And one of those purposes for us is the actual vehicle of tangible graces. And like we'll say that they like you I guess we could say like like the white garment at baptism like symbolizes purity, and like there's like all these things that there's like symbolism within the sacrament, right? But the sacrament itself, like what it is, isn't, we say it's an efficacious, it's actual, there's an actual grace being dispensed there, and you can see it through the objects and the words and the whatever. So it's not just like symbolism. And this is where I want to de-emphasize the priest, right? Because the priest is a representative of the Catholic Church. It's like he's like part of the formal, we call it the ministerial priesthood. The because like we're all baptized. Whenever we're baptized, we're all baptized priest, prophet, and king because we all have the responsibility to be the hands and feet of Christ. But a ordained priest in the Catholic Church, and this is where I am out of my pay grade. An ordained priest in the Catholic Church is a part of this formal ministry, and he is given this I don't want to say power because it's not magic. He's given this permission by Jesus Christ through the ministry of the church to stand as Christ to the people he is ministering to through the church. That was a lot of pronouns.
No, that I was actually just about to say, like, or what are those the little words like to and through, whatever those are, prepositions or something. You like
Yeah.
explain that, like I could tell, like you were like very thoughtful about which one you put at which place.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay. I can do this.
yes, no,
That was for
you
me.
did.
That's me cheering on myself. Okay. So Catholics, we call the Catholic Church the bride of Christ. So the church is his bride, meaning like he gives him his whole self to the church, being like the people, right? The Catholic Church is like the communion of all of us. But also there's the ministry of like that's like the formal Catholic Church. So if Jesus has this like perfect marriage, right? This like union of the church. And the reason he's like wedding his people and he's doing this through the sacrament. So if you think, okay, we're talking about sex a lot today, but like in a marriage union, right, there's the unity of the bodies. And that unity of the bodies comes through the church as the Eucharist. Like my body, Christ's body, unified.
Oh.
So oh, and I don't remember where I'm going. Oh yeah, the priest. But the priest is the one who says the words of consecration. So he is like he is the person who has laid down his life. Like think about like priests, they make a lot of sacrifices. Obviously, like they're not rich. Like generally speaking, and there are exceptions, but don't get married. Like priests are like their lives are a sacrifice, but also their specific role in saying the mass is sacrificial because they're saying this is my body given up for you. Like they are the ones who say the words that Christ said them as Christ says them to us. This is so like mystical. I'm having trouble using my words. So there's the Catholic Church is the bride of Christ, right? And the priest is the person who is standing in for Christ as he weds his church. And so when he sits in the confessional and I confess my sins, I am confessing them to another person, but I am confessing them primarily to Christ in the way that I experience Christ in the most visceral way, which is sacramentally, right? Because if you think about like that union that I have with Christ, like through the Eucharist, it's like a very visceral, like it's in my stomach. Like we can track it on my anatomy. Like it is in my body. It is a very specific thing. Has calories, has gluten. That's a problem for some people, Like it is a physical reality. And so when I sin, right, there's a physical reality to sin also, like I hurt people, that I wound I wound the church. I wound Christ's people. And so I go back to Christ in a very visceral way, and that visceral way is the sacrament. I don't think that was helpful. I don't think that answers what you were asking. I'm having so much trouble explaining it because it's just like in my guts thing.
Yeah, no.
It's not like an in my head thing.
No, that's really thank you for explaining it. I can't like I can't if I said I understood it all, I would be lying. But like
Me
you
neither.
but like you explained it really well and it's like I think something just to see how like I think a stereotype I've had is that all those things can be just like rituals, and like the way you explained it, just like you can tell it's not. Like you can tell it's like all
Right.
so intentional and significant and meaningful. And it's
Yeah.
so like that in itself, I didn't understand any of the words. Like it's really cool. And I think, and this is a topic for another time because I know we're like past an hour, but
I
like
know.
I think like something that I think of is so for you, if like knowing the meaning behind all of those things and
Mhm.
like they're all meaningful and like you write to Jesus, like they're not just like rituals,
Right.
is beautiful. But then I think of like, what about the people who don't know as much as you do? Like,
Yeah.
so that's a whole new topic. But like, so thank you for explaining that. Like,
Yeah.
I think the explanation, what I got from it is awesome, but also just like your passion behind it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks for
So,
listening. I think that was a mess, but I'm but like it's so hard to explain, and I think this is kind of I know we're over time, but I do this every time, and I'm sorry, but like your question, like what about people who don't know as me, like as much as I do, or like can't articulate it? Which, by the way, what I did could not be described as articulate, but like you can't even articulate that far, or like even in your own head. Like for me, the Eucharist, like there aren't words that I like. Everything I just said is like that is the best way I can explain it right now, and it is woefully inaccurate to my actual like experience. And I think that for a lot of Catholics that I know and that I'm friends with, um, like they might not be able to articulate. Actually, like I would say for most people, I just read a lot of books, so I know a lot of words, and I can put them together in a way that is probably, I would say, like above average compared to your average Catholic, just because of like the amount of times I've heard other people put words together to try to explain these things. But I think our experience, like I don't necessarily have a deeper experience of the sacraments than someone who can't articulate it because it's not an intellectual action. Like I said, it lives in my guts, not in my head. Like it's just like it's just different. It's just something that can't be articulated.
yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. And I think from, I think one thing too, like, as for me, like, I feel like the things, what am I trying to say? I don't know. Speaking of
Welcome to
articulate,
my life. No, I'm just kidding.
but like that, like it not that, because like you said, it's not intellectual, but like it seems like it's would take a while to understand. Like I feel like and as a Protestant, we kind of emphasize the like you walk in, we want to make you feel welcome right away kind of
Mhm.
thing. Whereas like when I go to a mass, like I don't understand the significance of it, so I don't
Right.
get all that you get out of it.
Right. No, that's true. And I think that's something that's so hard for like me in particular as someone who like I like minister. And it's hard to like try to like explain it, but
Mm,
be like, but it's not about the explanation. Like it's really hard to sort of
yeah.
like unpack that relationship. And I think part of that's just because it's like so old,
Mm,
and
yeah.
it's also like very Jewish. Like a lot of this stuff has a lot of Jewish meaning behind it. Um, and that's been like learning my Jewish heritage kind of, not like ethnic but religious, is has really helped me to understand like what I do. But yeah, it's just like I think about the old church ladies all the time, right? Who like don't really know anything about, and that's so mean, but like like women didn't really get educated. Like they had their kids young, like whatever. But they're these older women who, like, but they have a visceral understanding, and you can tell because they show up every single day, and like you can see it in their faces. And so I don't know how we get there without the word. Like I just don't know. This is I don't know. And I think the whole American Catholic is trying to figure this out right now. Like how do we
Mm,
make people feel welcome without making it seem like it's an intellectual act? Because it is intellectual, but it's like mostly not. So I don't know. It's just kind of
Yeah, no, and that's I mean, I think that's the thing for all of us, like, to like, for like, I feel like it does just take time too, like, we can
yeah,
have that initial experience that's like, "Wow, I wanna be part of this," but then, like, there are things that I've learned and also, like, not I feel like I don't mean to act like I'm old because I, like, there's so like, I have much more to learn than I have already learned, but
yeah,
I feel
same.
like things that I've learned, like, more recently, I couldn't have learned right away, like, I just couldn't have because it
Yeah,
and so it like, I feel like you don't need to understand you can't understand every part of Christianity just by walking into church. So I feel like there's a difference between, like, "Oh, I feel welcome here," and, like, "I understand every part of the service." So I don't mean to hold you to that standard because I don't hold myself or my church to that standard.
yeah,
You can walk into the mass and, like, get something out of it without knowing the details behind every part. Because like, I don't know the details behind everything we do, like, so I don't mean to, like, hold you to that standard where I don't hold myself.
no. I almost think you should though, because the thing with Catholicism is like, okay, like, so we like I do this every time, but in the early church, right, like when they were doing mass, like in the first century or whatever, like new Christians, like before you were baptized and confirmed, you couldn't come to mass. Like you were not allowed to come because they were like, this is basically like this is too much for you to handle. Like you can't handle the Eucharist because you're not baptized, you're not confirmed, you're not like you're not ready, you're not formed. Like we'll use the word formed, and that's like intellectual, spiritual, like that's like a lot of like all the different components. It's not just like rote teaching. But like you're not formed enough for the Eucharist yet. Like you can't handle it yet. So they weren't even allowed. so so there is something about that like the early church had this idea that like the wholeness of like having our like community as Catholics is not supposed to just be mass on Sunday. It's supposed to be this whole like threaded throughout my life experience. And I think that I actually think that like this comes from Protestants. Like we've taken that because like Protestants, like you can have a lot more fellowship and a lot more dialogue within a Sunday service. Maybe not at your specific, but you know what I mean? Like there's just a lot more room for meeting the immediate needs of the community within a service, where in Catholicism there's not. But in Catholicism there was never intended to be.
Mm.
And I think in America we kind of like have like as people, like we've taken the Protestant view of like we do church on Sundays and we've co-opted that in a context where it doesn't make any sense. Because
Mhm.
Protestants can do the fellowship, you can do the teaching, you can welcome people in your Sunday service. The Mass is not supposed to be that. The Mass is supposed to be a celebration of the sacrament. It is not supposed to be any of those other things. And American Catholicism in particular has made it sub in for all those things, but it can't,
Huh, that's really interesting
you
because
know?
like, from my perspective, it's like, why don't Catholics, like, fellowship on Sundays? Like, why it seems cold, but, like,
Yeah, it does.
but what you were saying, like, that's because that's not the time that was intended to fellowship. Like, that was the time
Right.
that's intended to receive the Eucharist. Oh, man, that's so interesting,
Yeah, but
and
then
so how
too, the thing is we don't fellowship. So like there's that's an issue.
yeah, because it's not that
We
you don't
do, we do, but like not as like a whole. Yeah,
yeah, like, Sunday morning isn't the place and the time.
right.
Wow, that's oh, man, that's so good.
Yeah, so when I'm like when people are interested in the Catholic Church that are like my friends, whatever, I do not bring them to mass. I'm like, we'll go to mass when you're ready. Like you can come, but I wouldn't. This is what I usually say. I'm like, they're like, oh, like I don't want to go to church yet. I'm like, don't like, like I actually am like, don't come to mass with me. Which you know, people are gonna argue with that. That's pretty controversial. But I am like, well, in the early church, that's fine. I'm not gonna do it because they knew Jesus. So, and Jesus, right? Like, okay, sorry, I really need to like calm down, but I'm not going. But like Jesus, when did he institute the Eucharist, right? Like when like we'll say that the first mass was the Last Supper. Yo, that was 3 days before he got crucified. Like he didn't start at the beginning with the mass. He started with the Beatitudes and sitting with people and eating with them and fishing with them and like doing all of these other things. And slowly unpacking who he was and what he did, and then united himself. Like, it's like that would be like, you know, premarital sex. Like we don't fully
What?
unite ourselves right away. Like, there's a process. There's dating. There's talking on Tinder. No, I'm sorry. Okay, cut
No,
that
no,
out.
that's
Edit that out.
That's not how a live stream works.
no, but Val, that's actually such an interesting analogy, though. Like,
Yeah,
'cause-
it's my favorite one.
no, but like that's actually so interesting because like, and just like you were, wow, just like just that the mass is not the same as a Protestant church service.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
like
Mhm.
Matt, wow. Okay, that's like so interesting because like for us, like one of the first things you do is like come to church. Like that's how you start. But like if you think of the mass as like receiving the Eucharist and all that it means, then that's obviously not where you would start.
yeah. That's not the point. Yeah, it's literally like it's the same reason we save sex for marriage. Is like that full
Wow.
unity is not intended right from the get go. It's intended after there's a whole like introduction and like commitment and yeah.
Wow, that okay, when you first said that, I was like, why are we talking about sex again? But then but now that you've explained it, that like is such a helpful analogy.
I think so because okay, again, down a rabbit hole, but I think like especially with my peers who've like experienced like physical relationships and like even marriage or something like that, it is the most helpful tool for me to explain my faith is by drawing off of people's experience of like marriage because
Mm,
it is like it's the most similar thing to the sacramental life because marriage for us is a sacrament and that's the one that most people have experienced. So yeah. So
wow.
that's just me. That's not Catholicism. That's me being like, well, it's like sex, and people are like, oh boy, that's just a Val thing.
Well, we are at 5:55. We said we were gonna end at 5:30. So I don't
Oh
wanna.
yeah, Elizabeth, you have to be gone soon.
Well, it's not a hard end. That's like when we're gonna have dinner. So like it's
Okay.
okay if I'm a few minutes late. But
Okay.
anyways, sorry, Matt. I feel like you're like little like I can't see your face, but like the little like circles around your like icon start and then we just keep talking. It's
It's
like
okay.
I know Matt
That's
is
like,
trying to cut in. But I'm just gonna pretend that I didn't see that little wave.
I
I like don't even look at this side of the computer.
most of the time I'm just laughing. Or
Yeah,
that's
sometimes
Matt,
also
though.
feel breathes hard.
Poor
yeah.
Matt. We don't mean to like underemphasize because we always really, really appreciate you and like all you do for tech and that you add your perspectives too. Like you
Yeah.
are not any invaluable. I mean, wait, you are not unvaluable. You're isn't it invaluable means very valuable?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I
we
don't know where you're
can't
going with
even
this.
value you highly enough. Invaluable, I think.
Oh, there we go. You're not
It's never made sense
unvaluable.
to me
You're
actually. I don't know.
invaluable.
Well, the stream can see me fine, so
I,
because I'm
I
up on
hope
their screen.
I hope someday I watch this and Matt's just like sitting there with like things, like holding up signs like they're the worst.
There's a
He
lot
has
of
no idea because we can't see him.
there's a lot of nonverbal things that I do. Like Val makes some sort of joke or something, and I laugh and I just shake my head or something.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, we
Um,
should. I should definitely go back and watch this and like watch Matt's expressions. But
Yeah, we gotta hold Matt accountable here.
sometimes I hide behind my microphone since I have this big filter in front of it, so it's like all you can see is my eyes over top, and that's it.
That's funny. Yeah, but this
Anyway.
was a big one.
yeah, I love how we like start and we're like 5 minutes before we're like, okay, let's talk about sin. And then it just evolves. Like I think with the Holy Spirit's guidance, it just evolves into a great conversation.
Yeah, and like I think we really start to unpack like the layers there are in like the worldview. You
Yeah.
know, and how like we're like, oh, we'll just talk about this, and I always am like, oh, well, this is only gonna take us like half an hour. But then like when we have to like deconstruct and reconstruct a whole worldview, like it just takes us a very long
Yeah.
time to do that twice per video to like understand each other, which is like pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right,
Well,
well,
well, end the stream there and pick this stream back up in a few weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. All right. Farewell, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.